Today's episode of Market Talk is brought to you in part by GrowMark FS. Keeping up on the latest in ag is a challenge to say the least, but there are experts nearby ready to help. You'll find them at your local FS. You can trust them to bring you customized agronomic grain and energy solutions born of the latest thinking. That's because FS specialists receive continuous training that keeps them current on the latest trends, practices, and technologies. So you'll get local expertise that's both current and up to date. Visit fssystem.com to learn how FS is bringing you what's next. And good afternoon. Welcome into Market Talk here on this Thursday, June 16th. I'm your host, Jesse Allen. Great to have you with us. Joining us here today to go through our market analysis, our good friend Bryan Doherty, Senior Market Advisor at Total Farm Marketing. Bryan, good afternoon to you, sir. Hope you're having a great Thursday.
I am, Jesse. Thank you. Great Thursday and a good market day today. So I've got green on the board, and that looks good. Well, it looks good because I think there's some concern about weather. So that's not looking so good if you're in some of these regions that might get really hot and on the dry side right now.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's the best place to start here today. I was pleasantly surprised early on with the sell-off in the stock market after yesterday's Fed news that grains have held up the way they did on Thursday. But you said it perfectly. You know, green on the screen, a lot of double-digit strength in corn, beans, and wheat, bean meal as well. Really, bean oil, the only market that was kind of down. It felt like in the grains here today for the most part. And you brought up the weather. It seemed like that hot, dry forecast kind of outweighed some of that outside macro market news here today.
You know, it has, and this is one of the first days where we've seen where, to your point, the stock market has been down, and I've kind of been making this argument over the last several weeks when we've seen, or several days, I guess, more so when we've seen the market down in equities pretty hard, that the funds could be, or the money managers taking a hard look at their portfolio balance and then rebalancing their funds to make it more in line with what their rules might be. And then also I think kind of that seasonality, if we want to call it that, or that time of year where history might indicate that the market goes down more so toward the end of June than higher as the crop begins to all of a sudden shoot out of the ground and get green, nitrogen kicks in. But boy, this year is anything but normal. The other thing I think the backdrop is almost daily you're reading about how the United Nations is working behind the scenes to get something accomplished with Ukraine, and I just don't see it. And the other news article you'll read is like there's no progress. So the point of it is, it's just there's nothing moving in that corridor right now. So that becomes a little bit more problematic in the bigger picture of these supplies that are now on hand for a year or maybe longer. How long can they last? So there's those questions. And what do you do with this year's crop?
Very, very true. Do you think we could maybe potentially see the stock market divorce itself a little bit from the ag commodities here as we get into the back half of June? Or do you think maybe this is just a one-day anomaly at this point?
That's a great question and very astute, because there are, according to Jim Cramer, there's always a bull market somewhere, right? So, um, a- a- um, and so where's the bull market? Well, you've got limited energy supplies, you've got inflationary concerns, and you've got dollars that, if you've been buying commodities, other than the volatility of it, are all higher priced than where they were 6 months ago and a year ago. I'm talking about the energies, the agriculture markets, in particular, row crops. So I think, these markets lend real opportunity if there's anything less than ideal weather in the forecast. And I think the investment community, as well as small and I'm including small and speculators, or farmers look at they don't sell and if it looks hot and dry. So there's a lot of dynamics that can quickly change sort of the fortunes of the market. But I do think that there's dollars always looking for investment somewhere, and the equities look pretty sour. And some of the things you're hearing about the interest rate hike yesterday, 375 basis points or 0.75%, maybe another 0.5% coming up in a month. That's not what the market wanted to hear.
No, very much so, very much so. On the weather side, you mentioned, we're kind of watching this heat and dryness right now. A lot of traders are concerned. On the flip side, for the most part, areas where the crop has gone in, things are looking pretty okay. I had a good windshield view here earlier this week of crops through Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, parts of Missouri, parts of Iowa, really the eastern third of Iowa. And I mean, there were some fields that did look great, but there was plenty of fields that looked fairly solid. So, one has to wonder that, even though the crop looking good, it just seems like this heat and dryness and this ridge is really kind of overtaking the mindset right now, which is typical because this is kind of that time period where we're in a weather market.
Well, it's perceptive in nature. And I think one thing that the bull traders have recognized over the last several months, and any traders, if you wait around too long, it takes off without you. So if there's the perceptive view of less than ideal weather in the forecast, there's also the view of I better get in sooner than later. So there's some of that. Today's a big technical day. You have December, you have all the corn contracts pushing above the 40 and 50-day moving average, likely uncovering some buy stops, starting to build a little more momentum now to the top side. By chart formations, I've got some inverted head and shoulders. Those look friendly. So you've got some things here that really start to stick out as potentially friendly, and I think the buyers are pretty quick to jump at that. I think they'll be just as quick to jump out too. So we have to be cautious of just how sharp our bull horns get on a day like today.
I think as well in corn, some of that cash market strength is maybe an indicator of those tight supplies, and that could be helping out some of the action as well.
Well, yeah, and considering export sales were marketing year low, they're just not happening right now in the old crop. So you kind of look at that and go, "Ooh, maybe we won't even meet the USDA projections." Time will tell, but I think the market in part is reflecting high value and is reflecting the end user probably buying as needed right now. They see the southern hemisphere. Brazil's got a good crop. It'll be a record second crop, even though it won't be quite what it could have been. And there again, the market moves off of perception of what's expected, not necessarily what could have been. The expectation is that the crop could have been higher. So it's a good crop, but it could have been larger. So any of that fundamental news is likely factored into the market. So I think here toward the midpoint of June, the market's taking a hard look at a forecast that probably it doesn't lend itself to all good. Not that kind of heat if you have any wind with it. It's going to drive people out in a hurry. To your point, you're seeing a lot of crop that needed heat units, and there's a lot of crop that's going to pop. Uh, but then we start talking about root systems and things like that. I'm in Wisconsin here. We got very nice copious rains last night. We need the heat. We're behind on heat units significantly. So this will make our crop pop. But it's only mid-June. We don't want a prolonged hot and dry stretch.
Brian, soybean meal today, very strong there. Seeing anything technically there? Because it looked like that really helped out soybeans in general.
It's a finicky spread, that meal oil spread, and today you're seeing the bean market with really solid gains, and you would just think, hey, we're going to see where both meal and oil are higher. In fact, you've got real sharp gains in meal and pretty sharp losses in oil. So the traders are reversing out of that spread. Maybe a little bit of a crack in the wall aligning of crude oil this past week, where prices peaked and dropped off $4 or $5. We're very volatile today. There might be some of that. There might be some of this prospect where, hey, you know what, meal's kind of been the dog all year, and the trade just decided to start changing their bias on this. Meal did decisively move above the 40-day moving average and the 50-day later in the day. So I think we probably uncovered some buy stops with that. But I think that was just the oil meal spread today. We had crush numbers out, showed some good numbers there. A little bit surprised that meal probably found the strength that it did today based on those numbers, because you'd think there'd be ample meal supply. But yeah, we're looking at very interesting long term, probably value buy in meal. I don't think we should live back in the day where 300 meal was where you wanted to target for. It's 350, 375 is the new probably low, and now you better get aggressive at 400 if you look at any kind of adverse weather.
Brian, I fielded a question as well in my email this morning about advice for selling old crop corn and soybeans. Now, I'm going to open the floor to you. I have a feeling what your answer might be, but I'm going to let you kind of explain and expand upon this. But I would think with a nice rally here today, there's a lot of opportunity if anyone's holding on to some of those quote unquote gambling bushels right now.
and everything is relative. So the derivation of that question, I don't know if the farmer there has all of his old crop on hand or he's down to his last quote gambling stocks or 10% or some number that's not going to break him if the market falls apart, but he's kind of hoping for a little, let's say, extra out of it. um, I'm a big believer that if you're probably more than 10 or 15% of inventory on hand, that you get to this time of the year, it starts to really kind of put all your eggs in one basket. You're betting on a weather market, you're betting on an event. So if you're comfortable with that, fine, maybe consider some puts underneath that. But otherwise, I would be selling on rallies. I would be leveling this thing out. In particular, if you've got a good crop stand and things look good, you've got to start moving most people probably have to start moving their inventory sooner or later. There's those guys out there that can store for 3 years. But even those guys, everything has a cost. So if you're holding on to something in inflationary and higher interest rate periods, there's a cost to holding on to that. So I'm a believer in, if nothing else, start averaging this out, trickle some out every week, set some target points above the market, start getting divorced from this old crop. If you want to re-own the market, know your tools. You're only one phone call away from your advisor who can probably pick up any amount you want to own in less than a minute. So it doesn't have to be in a bin.
Well, and unfortunately, I wasn't given a percentage or anything. I was just given that general thought from a grower, but great advice there. Wheat market, real briefly today, really strong there. We had some seasonal harvest pressure, it felt like yesterday, but today it seemed like wheat was moving higher along with corn and beans. Any thoughts to the wheat market in general here on this Thursday?
Well, it's one of those where everything is up pretty strong, but the way that wheat has been trading, and trade closed 24, 25 higher today, 28 higher in July, Chicago. The way that it's been trading is it's been the leader here for several months, and then all of a sudden it seems to take more of a backseat here lately. Can't get out of the starting blocks. So when you look at wheat and go, boy, 23, 28 higher, that's a heck of a day until you look at corn, 14, 15 higher. So it's a good day for wheat, but it really hasn't broken out of anything out of its recent range. So I think I would call it more of a follower today. I think all attention continues to focus on, well, I'm going to say three things. One is, what is the actual spring wheat, numbers going to look like, not only here but in Canada, and then the condition of that crop to the current weather and right now some real critical zone for a lot of wheat. If you got rain, or if you didn't get rain, you're going to get heat. All of a sudden, your yield is going to be likely downgraded. And then thirdly, again, just the kind of the I'm going to call it chaotic mess that Ukraine finds itself in. Where do you move bushels? There's a lot of talk of the USDA, or the U.S. at least, the administration talking about helping to build silos on the border of Poland and Ukraine. And I when you hear something like that, to me, it brings up 10 questions. So uh,
Mhm.
I don't know if any of those answer can be answered with confidence in a war, but maybe it does something. But it just I don't. To me, it just confirms that things are a mess and they're not going to get better anytime soon.
Let's hit livestock, Brian. Cattle markets mixed to lower here today. I have to think, especially feeder cattle, some of that pressure from higher grain prices and the stock market losing steam. Hogs had a solid day, though. Really good export sales for hogs here today. I noticed China back at the pork market this week. Any thoughts, cattle and hogs here on this Thursday?
The net on the hogs, nice update, but we're not changing anything a lot over the last 6 weeks. We're at the same price that we were back in the early part of May, so we're back and forth. We've talked about this before. I've been a proponent that the hogs got way overpriced early on in the year, and then they backed off, and now they're trying to find their way. I think as long as corn stay high price, I don't really see any reason to believe expansion is going to be in a big way. Probably the biggest limiting factor for both hogs and cattle. And actually, it's a pretty good looking cattle chart considering the stock market today. Pretty good chart here this last couple of sessions. Um, that I think when you look at what kind of the undercurrent of what appears to be growing demand, better cash markets, better grilling season, exports remain good year to date, on pace with USDA's projections. I think that the cattle market is well supported. Hogs are well supported. I just don't know right now, given the kind of the outside wet blanket of this, all of a sudden, bad economic and I those are my words. The high interest rate, uncertain equities market, and a lot of talk about heading toward recession. I think the trade is just finding it hard to get the speculative interest really roared up in there. Ultimately, we keep going back to this. There's going to be a shortfall of cattle somewhere. It's just when is it by December or is it by April of next year? And again, I'll continue to argue. I think the back months they're holding pretty steadfast, 154 over 154 in April. So I don't want to ramble on too hard, but we're not really going anywhere fast. But I think in both meets there's a strong undercurrent of support. I just don't know if we've got an outside environment that leads to a strong uptrend right now.
Bryan, fantastic stuff as always. I know we're getting up against the clock for you. Before we run out of time, any final thoughts you have for us on this Thursday?
Just pay attention. Exercise strategy. If you have any questions, just give us a shout.
TotalFarmMarketing.com is where you can find them and find all their information to get a hold of them via email or via phone call. With that, Bryan Doherty, Senior Market Advisor with Total Farm Marketing. Always appreciate it, sir. Have a great rest of your week and weekend.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jess.
Bryan Doherty with Total Farm Marketing joining us today here on Market Talk. Find us online, markettalkag.com. I'm Jesse Allen. Have a great afternoon.